Hi friends, I'm Teresa Tysinger, and I am here to read an excerpt from Suddenly Forever. This is the second book in my Laurel Cove series. It's been out a few years, but with it being fall time, when Tony asked me to do a reading for her Wednesday excerpts, I knew immediately that this was a perfect time to revisit this book. It is set in the mountains of North Carolina, in the little fictional town of Laurel Cove, and it takes place in the autumn around a lake, and in it, it's just got all of the things I love about that area of the country this time of year. It's got pretty leaves and perfect weather and, those crisp smells of, autumn. I just love it. But this is a little bit deeper story with some threads of grief and family and new and old relationships and healing and sort of searching for things that we need. Anyway, the scene I'm about to read you is got Cora, who is our heroine, and Luke, who is the hero. They are neighbors on the lake. They both live in different cabins on the lake, and they've kind of had a rough start to their neighborly friendship. And in this, it's coming after a time that Luke kind of misstepped a little bit and not really hurt Cora's feelings, but she's dealing with some things, and he just sort of stepped out of bounds ahead of time and feels like he owes her an apology. So anyway, that's where we pick up. He'd come in with such gusto, but sitting next to Cora on the dock, Luke found himself disarmed by her mere presence. After days apart, her effect on him had a new, stronger potency. With his arms draped around his knees, he stared out over the lake and waited for a brilliant speech to come. Finally, with only 2 words on repeat in his head, he sighed and turned to look at her. Wavy strands of golden hair fell from a mound atop her head and blew around her. She reached to tuck several pieces behind her ear. When their eyes finally met, it was like 2 puzzle pieces snapped together in Luke's heart. "I'm sorry." He drew in a quick breath and held it. Her gaze fell to her lap where her hands fiddled with her phone. "You don't have to say that." "Sure I do. If I push too hard or overstepped, that's on me." Luke waited for her to look at him again and licked his dry lips. "Just say what you came to say." He nodded to himself and continued. "Listen, I'm not insane. I realize we've known each other a very short time, and from the little bit you've shared with me, I'm sure there's a great deal I can't possibly understand about your life before I got here. But the bottom line is, I think you need a friend." The side of her lip creased under her teeth before she turned away from him toward the cove. She was so hard to read. Was she about to cry? Was she really listening to what he was saying, or was she still blinded by anger, grief, or some other emotion he didn't understand? He fixed his gaze across the lake and sighed as another strong gust of wind rushed around them. When it finally stilled and the space around them quieted, he turned and spoke to the side of Cora's head, which still faced the cove. "So I'd like to be your friend." His shoulders relaxed as if he'd just turned in a big assignment. He'd said what he came to say, plain and simple. Now it was up to Cora to decide if she wanted him as a friend. At least if she rejected the offer, he wouldn't go to sleep that night staring at the ceiling, wondering where she stood, if she'd call, and whether he should reach out. After what felt like several minutes of silence, she finally faced him. She opened her mouth just as a violent wind whirled to life again. Cora covered her face with both hands and ducked her head. Luke's eyes watered as the cold stung them. He braced himself with a hand on the dock to keep from toppling into her as leaves from the shoreline blew around them in a frenzy. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the wind left. The silence and stillness that replaced the chaos was almost eerie. Cora's breathing was heavy, her hair a mess around her. She looked at Luke, and one corner of her mouth upturned. "I'd like very much to be your friend." Luke's chest swelled as a smile broke across his face. Whether it was the wild winds of change that swept over her or a true change of heart, he didn't know, but it was a good starting point. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the bright orange flyer he'd found earlier on his windshield. So apparently this festival is a big deal around here. I think I need a friend to show me the ropes. He raised his eyebrows and cocked his head to one side. She eyed the flyer and grinned. On one condition. Name it, he said. You buy me a cider donut. Luke laughed and extended a hand to her. Deal. It was the easiest deal he'd ever made. Luke would take one day at a time as they learned what being friends meant, living alongside this lake that seemed to have a mind of its own. Something told him it wasn't going to be easy, and this recent misstep wouldn't be the last with Cora. But if the rest of his life had taught him anything, it was that things in life were... Oh my gosh, I completely botched that last line. Rewind. Let's finish off. Let me do that again. Okay. Sorry. Something told him it wasn't going to be easy, and this recent misstep wouldn't be the last with Cora. But if the rest of his life had taught him anything, it was that things that were worthwhile were rarely ever easy. Sorry about that crazy ending. But these little excerpts are hard to record without some sort of crazy, you should see some of my bloopers. They're pretty funny. Anyway, we got through that, so we're going to call it good. This is just one of my absolute favorite books. If you've ever dealt with grief, if you've ever known someone who has walked through grief, it's heavy and it's hard. But I think what this book ultimately, I hope what Cora and Luke's story ultimately will share with you is that the people that we allow and bring alongside of us can really help us through that. So really this is a very hopeful book. The story is one of redemption and new beginnings, and I really hope that this fall or sometime in the near future, you might pick this up and read it and enjoy their story. So hope you have a great season.